I think we're live.
I think we are. Hello, everyone.
Oh, we're live. Hello, everyone. I just saw it in chat. Sorry if I was sitting there staring at the screen. I am Grant Faulkner, Executive Director of NaNoWriMo, and I'm super excited about today's podcast because we're going to talk about publishing and indie publishing in particular. And there is just a ton to know about indie publishing, but I promise you after this webcast, you're going to know a lot of it. I like to think a lot of people get intimidated by all these next steps of publishing, and they are intimidating, whether you're traditionally publishing or independently publishing. But I like to try to think of it as one big creative journey. Like you put a lot of creativity in putting your words on the page and constructing your story. But I always encourage writers to keep that creativity going in the more businessy aspects of a novel, which definitely can be, if you're like me, I'd rather write than do all that other stuff. But we're going to learn from the best here today. In fact, one of the things I love about the indie writing community or indie writing publishing is the community around it. It's such a strong, nourishing community. And so I'm happy to welcome two great members of that community, Adam Croft and Tara Crimmins. Welcome, guys.
Thank you for having
Thanks,
us.
Grant.
Yeah, I wanted to introduce people. I'm going to have to put on my reading glasses here. I want to get your bios absolutely correct. Adam has amazingly sold 2 million books, which is hard for me to fathom. He's one of the most successful independently published authors in the world and one of the biggest selling authors of the past few years. And his books focus on crime series and psychological thrillers and mysteries. And he's been published or sold in 138 different countries. And I counted 32 books on his website, including Amazon singles. Hope my count was right. Adam is also considered to be one of the world's leading experts on independent publishing, which is why he's with us today. And he's been featured on a number of other news shows and media outlets. And he's also the host of the crime fiction podcast Partners in Crime with fellow best-selling author Robert Daws. So I encourage people to tune into that. And then Tara Crimmins is the senior manager of author experience at Kobo Writing Life. And she's responsible for the overall author experience on Kobo Writing Life. And as the subject matter expert in all aspects of indie publishing, her aim is to make Kobo Writing Life the greatest and most user-friendly self-publishing platform available. So we're going to hear about that from her, how to make it easy with Kobo. And you can sometimes hear her also as a guest. We have another podcast veteran on the Kobo Writing Life podcast, if you're interested. And if you're interested in publishing with Kobo Writing Life, create your account today at kobo.com/writing life. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Grant.
Yeah, and just so you know, the audience, please put your questions in chat if you have them. We're going to try to answer all your questions. That's what we're here for today. But first, I thought we could kick it off, Adam. I'm just curious if we can go back in time before all of these 32 books were written. Tell us a little bit about who you are as a writer and where your journey started, how you decided to be a writer. And did you ever think you'd be a best-selling author?
I'd hoped I would. Of course. But it was a pipe dream. I'll take your word on the 32 books, by the way, because I've actually lost count myself. So I'll take that as gospel now and start using that as the number. But yeah, I've been writing all my life, I guess. I was always a kid at school who kind of went his own way and didn't like the conventional school system, and I just wanted to do my own thing and probably living in a bit of a daydream world. And I remember on a number of occasions being taken out of class and sat down to write a story because that was the thing that would actually get my attention and that I would sit there and do. So I think it's something that's always been there. But I first started writing a book, and that would have been about 13 years ago now, first one. And that took me about 2.5 years to complete, which is even more impressive when you then find out it was a 21,000 word novella that I actually ended up with after 2.5 years, which was absolutely dreadful as well, but came out in the very early days of digital publishing and independent publishing. I think the Kindle had only been in the UK a year at that point, and it did quite well. And my aim at that point was for somebody that I didn't know, so not a friend or family member, to read the book and let me know what they thought so I could get some feedback and move on from there. And I'd always thought, the only route is traditional publishing, mainstream publishers. But I very quickly started to see that there was a lot of potential there and that this was something that actually could be a very viable career choice in itself.
That's interesting. You said 13 years ago, and by my memory, that's sort of, it's not the genesis of self-publishing, but that's when it started to become, I guess, a more mainstream thing, and writers started thinking about it more, and it was a more available option, I guess. And so I'm just curious because I know a lot of authors, and at least when they start out, they have a desire to traditionally publish because I think traditional publishing gives them a type of validation. But it's becoming a more and more interesting option and alternative for every author, I think, to consider. And so I'm curious what went into your decision to become an indie writer.
I mean, the validation thing is interesting because there is, as you say, this perception that in order to be a proper writer, you need to have had the acceptance of somebody sitting behind a desk in London or New York, whereas having gained that credibility through the acceptance of thousands or tens of thousands of readers is somehow less validating. And that I find that a very odd concept myself. Yeah, I think I didn't really know that independent publishing existed at the time. I mean, it's been going on for hundreds of years, but you used to have to pay for a print run and take the books around to shops yourself and things like that. But whereas, of course, what changed, as you say, 13 or so years ago, was the digital revolution and the fact that people were starting to read ebooks much more heavily, and that you could get those up there with great ease, virtually no cost. Very, very quickly, within hours, your book can be live. So that's what really changed, and that's what I sort of started to notice at that time. And I think for me, I've always had that entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurial spirit, and as I said earlier, going about things my own way, not wanting people to tell me how things are going to be done. So it just appealed to me as a way of doing things.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Tara, I'm curious because you've seen this shift in publishing. Do you have anything to add to that about the sort of the credibility and the availability of the option of indie publishing?
Sure. I think that that's one of the biggest myths, is that people choose independent publishing as a secondary option or have somehow been unable to get traditionally published. Like Adam said, somebody is sitting behind a desk and, didn't pick their book. Like, that's really not the case. Like, people are choosing to do this because it's a more viable option. It's going to earn them more money. They have far more control over everything. So that would be the one thing that I would dispel, and just sort of say that in digital growing, we've definitely seen independent publishing being a huge part of this. And then also to just sort of point out, to jump on what you were saying with sort of going one way or the other, is that, a lot of the stats that we look at don't take into account traditionally published books. So when we're kind of getting an overall sales stat for like growth of digital or indie or whatever, it's very difficult to get like overall terms. So there can be some sort of bias in the industry, which I think isn't really fair. And as Adam has shown, like that's not necessarily the case at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Well, we got a question here from Savvy Book Reviews, who asks, is self-publishing more expensive and trickier than traditional publishing? What would you say to that?
I would say yes, right, Adam? It depends.
It doesn't have to cost a whole lot. Is it trickier? I mean, it's trickier in that you've got more to do. I think one of the reasons I don't like calling it self-publishing is because you shouldn't be doing these things yourself. You shouldn't be designing your own cover, editing your own book. You should essentially be the author and run the publishing company, in essence. So yes, it's trickier. There's more to do, but I think actually it's far more rewarding. And I don't think it being trickier is necessarily an issue. I think I would find it far trickier myself, being with a traditional publisher, as I have been, and having those frustrations of not being knowing that things aren't necessarily going the way you want them, but also not being able to change them. I think when you're actually the one who's able to make those changes and do the things that need doing and do them within hours, I think that's very refreshing, especially in an industry which is now moving very, very quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of interpret that word tricky or trickier, because as you were saying, Adam, there's a trickiness too on the traditional side too. And I'm just going to define it more broadly, that you lose a lot of control. So it's tricky to have to accept actually what's happening to your book. You've sold it to someone else and it's a product to them. So they're making a lot of those decisions, and you don't have exactly that. You might have a voice, but it's hard to know how much that voice matters. And so I'm curious if you can talk to a little bit about that control that indie publishing gives you, and why you like that maybe.
Well, I think, when you've written a book and you've spent so much time on it and put so much into it, I think being able to make those decisions and even just small things, making any small changes or adjustments that need to be made here and there. There are icebergs that move faster than publishers sometimes, and it's very, very frustrating. But yeah, like you say, it's an interesting word, tricky. I think I'd say traditional publishing is more frustrating. I would also say it's not necessarily easier. It's not that you won't have to do those things. I'm sure this is something we'll cover later, but you will still have to do your own marketing, and you will still have to be entrepreneurial with a traditional publisher. You will still have to do those things and do your taxes and do the accounts and do a lot of all the social media stuff, all the things that people say they don't want to do, and that's why they're going to a traditional publisher. I mean, unless you're James Patterson, you're doing it yourself, I'm afraid.
Yeah. And I was going to say, on the cost side,
I wanted to mention.
Tara. You go ahead.
Oh no, I just wanted to mention that between the kind of independent publishing and traditional, it's very gray when it comes to, in terms of authors, that as Adam just mentioned, you are going to be responsible for a lot of your own marketing. Authors are kind of expected to have a following regardless of how you're being published, which is sort of interesting, because that is sometimes a misconception with the amount of work that's involved in choosing one over the other. I think the work is sort of the same. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. And I was going to say with that word expensive, I'm not sure that's exactly the right word either, because there's a different royalty structure, right, between indie publishing and traditional publishing. Could you speak a little bit to that, Tara, especially with Kobo?
Sure. It's kind of, in terms of expensive, you kind of have to think about it as your business. So it's how much you're willing to put and invest into creating your book, creating the best book that you can. So whether this is you should definitely be getting, really good editors, getting a dynamite cover, and getting your kind of marketing plan in place. I think that's very important to even before you're publishing. And then with the royalty structures, so with Kobo Writing Life, if your book is priced over $2.99 in the US, then you're receiving 70% on each sale, regardless of how you are pricing it. So then you do have that immediate return, whereas you don't get the advance that you would get with a traditional publishing house. There's kind of those balances on the other side. So I think looking at it as expensive is perhaps the wrong way, and I would really kind of frame that into like an investment that you're putting toward your business.
Yeah, good reinterpretation of these words. Well, you know what? Another word that's come up several times, and especially from you, Adam, is the word entrepreneurial. And at NaNoWriMo, one thing I really admire about our writers is they just have this DIY energy. They believe in like jumping in the novel and learn by doing. And I think that's not that it's required of indie publishing, but I think there's a lot of that kind of entrepreneurial spirit that helps one be successful in it. And so can you speak a little bit to that as a writer and an entrepreneur, I think I've heard it called?
Yes, we're very good at coming up with new words for things rather than just getting on and doing them. Yeah, it's I think you do have to be entrepreneurial, regardless of the route you take, the path you take. As I said a moment ago, you'll still be expected to do a lot of it, even if you are traditionally published. But I mean, and there's a lot of work involved, and some people think they're not entrepreneurial. But I would say don't get too hung up on it and don't worry about those things too much. It can seem very, very daunting at first. You don't have to jump in with both feet and do everything all at once. You can start slow and build up. There's none of this needs to be done. There are those of us who have been doing it for a few years and have said, actually, I've found that for me, this is the best way of doing it. It's not necessarily the same for everybody. I ignore a lot of conventional wisdom out there because I find it doesn't work for me, and other things do, and that may well be the same for you. I would say don't worry too much about looking at other people and saying, I've got to be doing this, I've got to be doing that. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to echo what Tara was saying a moment ago as well about it being an investment rather than a cost. I think you need to look at it that way, because this is a business and you are being entrepreneurial, and you wouldn't set up any other business and not expect there to be some kind of investment up front. You wouldn't open a shop and say, okay, I'm going to paint the sign out the front myself, and I'm just going to get, one or two items in stock in this massive, otherwise empty shop. And, once I've sold those, then I'll use that to buy more. And, it doesn't work like that. It wouldn't work like that in any other business. And I think the trouble sometimes we have is reconciling that artist side of the brain with the more logical business side of the brain. We all have, whether it's a small part or a large part, but I think it's all about engaging both of those sides and working out which bit needs to be used when.
I like your analogy of whether one would paint your own sign for your business. That really brings it home to me. As a bad painter and a bad artist, I'd have a really bad storefront. And I might also, if I designed my own novel cover. And that brings Lori L. Asked a question, and you mentioned this earlier, about what are some resources for hiring your team as a self-publisher, graphic designer, editor, proofreader. And I was, wondering if you can chime in as well, Tara.
Sure. Well, just to plug the Kobo Writing Life podcast, we actually did an episode this week that was just all about editing. And I talked to three wonderful ladies and that have all of the expertise about editing, where they're kind of balancing algorithms, they're doing story edits, copy editing. So to get down to the nitty gritty of details of that, I'd really recommend listening. So it's just called the Kobo Writing Life podcast. And that breaks down why more than one type of editor is sort of needed. And then in terms of like graphic designer and things like that, there's a lot of different things that you can do out there. I mean, I would kind of discourage people from wanting to create their own covers unless perhaps you do have a creative background in design. But there's a lot of different platforms, whether it's like BookBrush, Demonza, or just straight out just hiring somebody also to do. I don't know how did you get started, Adam? Like, did you have any learnings from your first book versus your 31st book?
Yeah. I mean, I was going to pick up on, the graphic designer is not what you want. You definitely want a book designer. They are.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
I was going to say they're just a very, very specialist thing. I mean, I say that purely because I have come from a design background and did design my first couple of covers, and they were absolutely dreadful, even though I had been doing that and earning money from doing that for a few years anyway. I was not a book designer, and books are a very specific thing, and there's very specific science and art behind those. So I'd say to anybody watching, look for a specific specialist book designer rather than your friend down the street who does website graphics or whatever. They are a different thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you're not only designing the book cover for the print edition, you're also designing it for the internet and for visibility on tweets and Facebook posts and on different sales platforms. Well, hey, go ahead, Tara.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a good, as we're sort of talking about people that are getting started, when we're thinking about graphics and kind of using design in general, I think one thing that's quite important is to get your brand. And I know it's kind of, I mean, I still struggle with, like thinking about your personality as a brand, but your author name really is. So that comes down to like having your base, like your author website, starting your newsletter, even things down to like your email signature. signature? Is everything really cohesive? Does it tell the reader what kind of books you're writing? Is the tone there? Do you have a tagline where somebody can know right away? So this all is important to build up in the lead up to any books that you're publishing, and can probably assist with looking for different book covers then, in terms of the tone and the colors and things that you use. So I would just, that's kind of would be my advice if you're definitely day one starting, would try and think about, if you had to characterize your author voice, what would that be?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, just to, we have a lot of writers who, of course, have never done any sort of publishing, who are attendees today. And Crystal Butler asks, can you maybe start from the beginning of the process? What does the process look like from start to finish? I think this is really important. What should a new indie writer expect in those early stages?
It's difficult to say, really. I'm not convinced there is necessarily a start and a finish. I think things kind of continue and meld into one. I'm still making tweaks and changes to my first book from sort of 10 years ago. I mean, I'm not going in and revising plot or doing things like that, but even occasionally still someone will spot something that needs tweaking, or I'll make changes to blurbs and things, or be doing marketing and advertising for it, because it's the first book in a series of what is now 10. So you're always going to be doing things on these books, and they're always going to be products of yours that you have there. It's not necessarily a case of getting them done, putting them out there and moving on to the next one. There's always an element of going back to them. I guess the question is the process of how to get the book out there in the first place. Maybe. It depends, I guess, really on what you're writing and what the book is, but the general consensus is getting an ebook up on, going direct to Amazon, going direct to Kobo, use an aggregator for the others perhaps, and I would say for paperbacks, if that's something you're looking to do, and you probably should, because it's much easier than you think it will be, I would say use somebody like Ingram Spark for that, mainly because even though Amazon might be tempting because it's there, it's in the dashboard, they're saying, oh, just click here to add the paperback, that there are some issues there. And I think for me, print quality is the main one. And I think wanting your product to be the best it possibly can be, making your book the best it possibly can be, and having pride in that, because why should somebody part with money when you've gone for the easy option or the cheap option? I think so. Yeah, that's something I would say to keep in mind. But it is a very difficult thing to summarize, really, the sort of start to finish thing, because it's different for everybody.
Okay, Tara, anything to add?
Yeah, I think there can be some tips, kind of in a practical sense of making sure that you're creating a really good digital file, whether that's using a tool that is available on the direct publication areas, like Kobo Writing Life has a conversion tool. But there are other ones that people really love. I don't know, Adam, how you create your books, but we hear a lot of authors are huge fans of Vellum. Yeah.
Big fan.
We also, I'm just going to keep plugging the podcast. We interviewed one of the two Brads at Vellum just in, I think it was in December. And that was a great conversation to chat to them to see what they're doing. And they also help with print ready files too, if that's something that you're interested in.
I'm going to pause you just a second here.
Mm-hmm.
So for beginning authors, a lot of them might write in a Word doc or another writing software. Why can't they just upload that?
Because the kind of industry standard for digital books is an EPUB, which just stands for e-publication. And that is sort of what's universally used. In essence, it's based in HTML. So if it's kind of easy to think about it as a website that is a book that can be used on like a digital reading platform. So there are a lot of ways that you can easily and for free convert a Word file to an EPUB. A lot of different platforms have them, like Draft to Digital have a really great conversion tool that you can use for that as well. Vellum allows you to do that, and is the feedback that we get sort of like the easiest and quickest way to convert. and then it outputs the EPUB file, and then you can load that file wherever. That's what's universally sort of taken everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, Amazon had their own type of file, which was the Mobi file, and they're stepping away from that now as well, because it's just the universal file that's used. And it was actually beneficial to Kobo's always sort of used an EPUB and had an emphasis on it. And when Sony went out of the digital reading business, because the Sony readers used EPUB, it allowed us to kind of keep their customers reading, that we could fulfill the files because Kobo had them readily available. So it's kind of just is a way to reach as many readers as possible. The EPUB is the way to go with digital publishing.
Gotcha. Yeah, there are a lot of interesting little things to know like that about the indie publishing journey, all the tools that are you need to use. This one comes from CB394, who asks, can anyone self-publish? For example, someone who has a very basic education or special needs. What do you think, Tara?
Yeah, absolutely. It's opening the doors to absolutely everyone, that if you have a book and a good story to tell, you can put that out there and kind of get your story to whoever would like to read it.
Yeah, I was going to say you can self-publishing is great as well. There are a lot of different ways to scale it. Of course, like you can aspire to be someone like Adam, who is a best-selling author who lives on his novel sales. But a lot of people, like we have classrooms that publish novels for the kids in the classroom. I know people who self-publish novels just for their friends and family, to give as gifts. So there are a lot of different ways to go about it.
Yeah, we're going to be hopefully working with different writing groups this year. Just Kobo, we're kind of doing this experiment where we'd like to kind of work with up and coming writers to get short stories and then like publish an anthology of these to at least kind of get people used to publishing and having like finished works out there. So yeah, as you mentioned, it doesn't, it's everyone publishes for different reasons, and it doesn't always have to be striving to be the number one there or the next Adam Croft.
Yeah, and you can work your way up to it as well.
Exactly.
Certainly nobody should be striving to be the next Adam Croft. I wouldn't advise that.
Let's see. Tessa Glitter, Unicorn Fairy, Vogs, asks, Vlogs, that's a great name, asks, what is the average cost for self-publishing? So this is a good question because, I mean, as you said, at least if you're going to do it professionally and try to gain sales from your novels, it's an investment. But we all have different amount of cash available to us. So what should one expect to pay for some of these things?
I would say it's very difficult to put a figure on, but what I would say, and something I cannot emphasize enough, is please do not pay anybody to publish your book. There are lots of companies out there, some very honorable, some run by very good people, but I would say there are also probably far more that are not so. And I mean, there's two ways you can go with it. At best, you're going to be spending a lot of money on something you can do yourself for next to nothing very easily, far more easily than you think. And at worst, you'll fall victim to scammers. So I would say, please don't pay anybody to publish your book for you. Anybody says, I will do it, I'll take the money. Some of them perfectly honorable intentions, but you can do it yourself for free, and that's really the best possible outcome from that. So essentially, you'll be paying a cover designer, and the costs can vary wildly. There are people on Fiverr who will do a great job. There are people who will charge you thousands and won't. So it's all about finding somebody who does the right thing for you and who does the kind of covers that you like the look of and the kind of style and vibe you're looking for. Editors, again, costs can vary massively. It depends whether you're looking at, there's a difference between proofreading, copy editing, and developmental editing. Do you need all of them? It depends.
Mm-hmm.
Again, and you don't necessarily need to be hiring 3 different specialist types of editors for each book either. But you can probably expect for a decent cover design to be spending a few $100s. Possibly the same for an editor. It's hard to put a figure on it because it depends on the length of the book. It depends on who you're hiring. But yeah, whatever you do, don't pay a company who says we'll do it for you. I would not advise that. I can't say that strongly enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it can be really daunting. I'm sure if you try to Google like publishing or self-publishing, it's just pages and pages, and
That's
you
where you
have
find
no,
them.
yeah, you have no idea what to trust and where to go. So one thing that I would say is that on Kobo Writing Life, we do have a services section where we have kind of trusted people that we work with. If you're interested in getting particular services, if whether or not it's editing or cover design or things like that. But one other piece of advice I would say is to really use the indie community. That's one of my favorite things about working in this field, is that it's a really forthcoming community. People share a lot of things that worked for them, different programs, just even learning now that Adam uses Vellum as well. There's many Facebook groups out there where people are sharing advice. You can find them specific to the genre that you're publishing in. There'll be different questions and answers about like what worked on Kobo, what didn't, and things that go just a lot of help. So I would try and find your group where would suit you, and chances are the question that you've asked has already been answered before, so you'll find that there. And always better to come from the people that are also doing it themselves.
I would say if anybody, so I was going to say, if anybody is looking for a group, I do actually run a Facebook group called the Indie Author Mindset, which again, there's I think a couple of thousand authors in there, varying levels, helping each other. And I don't, it's not for upselling for courses or anything like that. I don't do any of that, not anymore. So it's all completely free advice and quite a good little community as well. So
good name for the group.
I would recommend that. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to echo what you guys say. I've been so impressed over the years by the indie writing community. It is to me markedly different than the community of traditionally published authors, I guess. And I think there is something about that sort of underdog spirit and that entrepreneurial spirit of indie authors, and they really are looking out for every other author. They're really I'm just amazed by their generosity and the way they share and root people on. It's very, I think, NaNoWriMo in spirit.
I think it takes you back to that comment we had earlier where somebody said, can anybody self-publish, even if you've got different educational background or special needs? Or I think yes. I think the whole point of indie publishing is that it is the great leveler, and anybody can do it, and anybody from any background, and that's kind of the whole point. And if you can write a book, then frankly you've done the hard bit.
I can attest to that as somebody that has yet to win Nano. I can absolutely attest to that.
But you're trying, Tara. You're going to make it. This is your year, 2021. In terms of providing access to all, we have a question from NKR Tutorials. Do you have any tips for publishing at 18? And one of the things I love about indie publishing is how young people are publishing.
Yeah. And the different types of things they're publishing as well. Like there's a lot of people that are publishing like shorter content. I know that seems to be a bit of a trend on the different platforms. But yeah, I don't know if you have any tips in general, Adam, for anyone publishing at 18.
Not really, no. I mean, I think my first book I published when I was 24. Wasn't too far off there, but I'll be knackered if I can remember that far back, quite frankly. But yeah, on short form content, certainly that is something that is popular, and that's always done fine for me, because I think even my longest books are probably about top out of 60,000 words, and that I consider that to be like a war and peace epic due to my attention span and the way my mind works. But I think write what works for you and write what you enjoy. I think if you're trying to write to some kind of preordained formula that you think people want, or you're trying to write to market, or if you're saying, well, so-and-so's done this, I'm going to try and write like that, I think that inauthenticity will shine through, and that will possibly be your downfall right from the start. And making mistakes in marketing or in cover design, anything like that, they're all quickly and easily rectified. Rewriting a whole book because you've written in prose that isn't yours is a whole different ballgame.
That's a really good point. Be true to yourself. Yeah. And it reminds me way back, almost 13 years ago, but I think it was actually 7 or 8 years ago, I interviewed Hugh Howey back when he was kind of a really emerging indie published author and a NaNoWriMo author. And when I talked to him about all the same types of questions that we're talking about, he kept he wasn't conscious of this, but he kept saying, you've got to have the self-confidence. You got to have the self-confidence. And so he kept coming back to that word, self-confidence. And I thought about how that really went with indie publishing and writing. And so like when I look at this question about publishing at 18, I think, well, one, you're here, you're learning, you're posing that question, you're believing in yourself as an 18-year-old that this is a pathway that's available to you. So I think that's a huge step in having that self-confidence, like giving yourself permission to be indie published. And then I think like what you said, Adam, like staying true to your story. Yeah.
And I mean, at 18, brilliant. You know, I see all the time writers in their 60s and 70s who start doing this and have great success with it. So, you know, getting on that train at 18, that's you know, you can happily make a lot of mistakes and tweak a lot of things in that time. You've got all the time in the world to get it right at 18. So I'd say that's probably a big advantage.
Yeah.
I think that syncs too with the Can Anyone Publish? There was just this really charming story on the Irish news yesterday about a woman from Roscommon who published her first book at 95. So it's really nice to see that like it's for everyone and can be at any time. Just if you have the effort to and the confidence to put that out there.
Yeah, good point. Speaking of confidence, we've got a number of questions about marketing your books, and you mentioned even like a kind of concept of your personal brand, Tara. So I'm gonna back up and well, NKR again, tutorials just asked, how do you promote and market your own book? Adam, I want to start with you. Can you go back in time and think about like, I mean, I imagine putting that first book out of there might have been a little dicey in a way. Might have been.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I spent years just floundering and not knowing what I was doing. And you know, I'm still learning things all the time, every day. I don't think it's something you ever master. So, I mean, yeah, as for, you know, how do you market your book? I mean, you know, how many weeks do we want this video to go on for?
Yeah.
It's a massive wide world in terms of the marketing and advertising, what works, what doesn't. And the truth is, try different things every now and again and see what works for you. A lot of the time, you don't want to be following a conventional wisdom, because one of the main tenets of advertising is standing out and being seen. And if you're going, well, somebody's doing this ad or they're doing that and they seem to be doing well, so I'll do the same thing, you're not going to get noticed. And if everybody starts doing the same thing, it doesn't work. So I think standing out, being true to yourself, doing things your own way, and making sure that your voice and your style is reflected in whatever you're doing, in the marketing and the advertising. I mean, as I say, my books are fairly short. You're talking about branding yourself and how your email signature is and things earlier. My name is short. I like to try and get to the point on things like this and be fairly blunt and straightforward and cut the crap, if you like. So I guess that's kind of branded in me and the books. I think find your style and find your way, and the rest will follow.
Mm-hmm. So that brevity helps you stand out.
Do you know what? Isn't it ironic that you managed to summarize that entire speech with one word, and the word brevity?
Yeah. Are there any other tips you could either that you have tried or that you've noticed other authors be successful with? I think standing out's a really good start. Yeah.
I mean, I think the nub of it is you will have to pay to advertise in some form or another. It's just it costs money to advertise and to market. I think for me, Facebook ads have always worked pretty well. I think for selling books on Amazon, Amazon's own ads platform works well. For Kobo, the promotions dashboard is brilliant. And I think I would say for all other vendors other than Amazon, just speak to them. You know, they're real people. Tara's sitting here, you know, it's, I started a relationship with Kobo years ago just by firing off an email and saying, look, I'd like to sell more books on Kobo. What can we do? You know, they want you to sell more books because that is also their business. You know, they're in the business of people buying more books through their website. So treat it like any business, you know, build up these relationships and you know, see what you can do together,
including relationships with your author or your readers. Is that right?
Definitely.
Do you do a lot of or do you do a lot of like social media?
Yeah, I'm not brilliant at social media, but yeah, I do try and connect with readers as much as possible through my mailing list, through my readers group on Facebook, and I think the best thing you can do, as with any business, is word of mouth. Concentrate on making the product the best it possibly can be. And I don't like calling books products, but in the sense of talking about the business of writing, that is the product, and you are as well. So linking those two together, being authentic to your books and to yourself, keeping in with readers, keeping a positive vibe there, and having readers enthuse for you is always a good thing. And having that word of mouth spread, it is slow, but it's always going to be the strongest form of marketing there is.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that you don't like to think of books as products. I also don't like to think of them that way. I think they're something too sacred about that creative process that goes into them. Yeah. Do you have anything to add to this, Tara? Any tips from the Kobo side about marketing, promotion?
Well, I definitely think that building the relationships is really key. And just echoing what Adam said, that, we really want to see you succeed and want to help your books get out there. And we do have a promotions tab that has lots of different offers there for various different things that can suit lots of different people. But one thing that I would say as well is, if this is your first book, keep writing too. You might not want to put it all into just like marketing one product, but the more books you have, the easier it does get to sell your books. Depending on the genre, obviously, independent books seem to be heavily serialized, which appeals to the readers there. So I would, focus on the marketing, but it comes down to what Adam was saying about making sure that your book is the best it can be and getting the real readers there. So I would definitely just kind of hone your craft too while you're coming along.
Well, speaking of series, because I've heard this from many people, that the series, it is really advantageous if you want to sell books like Adam. And so is there a kind of pace that you set for the series, like a book every 6 months? And also I think like pricing, how do you price your books to make sure that people are able to kind of keep reading them or give them incentive to?
I mean, the way I keep up pace is when I finish a book and I go to start a new one, it's to look through the scraps of ideas I've got and find the one that really sings to me most at that point in time and the one that I want to write, because that way the book will get written. It will get written much more quickly than something I feel I have to write. In terms of series, yes, the conventional wisdom is that is a great way of hooking readers and pulling them in. I will add the caveat that I wrote series books for years and things only really took off for me when I actually wrote my first standalone book. And that was the one that really kicked things. Again, I tend to sort of defy logic in this industry and things work for me that don't work for other people. But having said that, in the last year, I've started a new series which is done phenomenally well and is doing better than those standalones now. So it depends. I mean, maybe I hadn't written the right series before. Maybe it's this is one that's just sings to people a bit more. So I think series they've got their benefits because the characters, there's an arc going through there, so half the book is already there before you even get to the individual plot of that particular book in the series. I do standalones and different things in between just to kind of cleanse the palette really and keep my interest there, because I think writing the same series continually for years would be a bit draining.
Mm-hmm. I want to plug NaNoWriMo here. NaNoWriMo, I think, is really conducive to the series pace of self-publishing because you're writing 50,000 words in a month. And so I think that's a good kind of approach to developing a series, especially if you're going to sell it or self-publish it.
I think with any sort of series, there's no real one rule fits all. But just with your pacing, just be consistent with your readers, and they'll respond to whenever you're releasing. So whether you're releasing one book a year, two books a year, or a book every 6 weeks, to just kind of try as much as you can to remain consistent with the releasing and like the marketing around that, and then readers will sort of just kind of come along with what you're doing.
Create a rhythm.
Yeah, there's no point in writing a crime book every 5 years or a galloping literary epic every 6 weeks. It's pacing it. for how it's meant to be paced, I guess, is the key.
Yeah. We've got a couple questions here about the printing end of things. Sunny Pluto asks, Adam, can you tell us again what service you use to print paperbacks? And Diana Thistle asks, are there print-on-demand options with reasonable quality?
The answer to both is Ingram Spark. I'd say, yeah, their quality, especially Ingram's quality in the last kind of year or so, is just phenomenal, to the point where they're indistinguishable from trade paperbacks, as they should be, especially with their groundwood paper option now, which is the kind of the more recycled, slightly rougher paper that you tend to get in a lot of trade paperbacks. And for my Rutland series, I've had print runs done through traditional printers that the big publishers use, and to be honest, the quality of those is not as good as Ingram. I think that it's really, they've really come on massively in the last year or so, and from what they're telling me is coming up this year, is going to get even better.
All right, great. Well, NKR Tutorials is asking another question, and this one's key to maybe the most important question I'm going to ask today. I'll be honest, my writing doesn't really sound professional with quotes around it, which is a first draft. So any tips on improving your writing? And thank you for answering my question. What would you do to improve? What would you advise to improve your writing?
I think the first question I'd ask is, who said it doesn't sound professional? Because I think if it's you that said that, then you're going to say that, and all writers think their writing doesn't sound professional. So I would say solicit feedback and see what comes back there. But also that's what editors are for. They will help make your writing so much better, and they will improve you as a writer, and writing will improve you as a writer. I think if it's not necessarily a bad thing if you are the one who says your writing is not professional, because you will know why that is, and you will improve with each book. And I look back now at my early books and I cringe, and my whole ethos is to make sure that each book is better than the previous one, and to keep improving each time. And I think the more you write, the better you will get. It's like anything, I guess, like learning an instrument, or playing sports, or whatever it is. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. So yeah, keep writing.
Yeah, good advice, Adam. And I was going to say, I think what people should know, and you tell me if I'm wrong here or this doesn't apply to you, but no matter how experienced and no matter how well published you as you are as a writer, you will always have those moments, which might be days, they might be weeks, of cringing.
Oh God, yeah. or lifetimes in my case. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the more experience you get as an author, it's not that your cringing diminishes, it's the belief that you can fix things and that you can work through them, and that by keeping writing, you'll get better. And it really is about like every book getting better than the previous book, right? Like you just keep.
I mean, if for the person asking the question, I think look back at something you wrote at school. Have you got better since then? Of course you have. It's you will keep getting better. The more you write, the more experience you gain, not just in writing, but in life. The more books you read, the more you're immersed in it, the better you're going to get. And it does feel slow, because these things, they take time, but just, believe me, those improvements are being made with every sentence you write.
I guess it comes back to like that question at the beginning about, where to start and finish. Like there is no start and finish in terms of this, is that like you're saying that you're always learning and always improving and coming up with better ideas for stories too. I think the more inspiration that you get.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, what is the number one thing you see indie authors doing wrong?
Is this me?
Anybody. Sometimes we can learn by what other people do wrong.
I think people worry too much and don't enjoy it, and don't remember why they wanted to do this in the first place. I think they worry about, I've got to do marketing, I've got to do advertising, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And the truth is, you don't have to do any of it. The whole point of being indie is you can do what the hell you like, quite frankly. I mean, if you want to do your own cover in Microsoft Paint, it might sell brilliantly. It probably won't, but it might do. And, these are recommendations and things that we're making, and these are things that I've done and have worked for me, and other people advise things that they've done and will work for them. But find your own way, go at your own pace. Don't feel you've got to do it all at once. Go at a pace which is right for you, and make sure that you enjoy it and that you're doing this for the reason you wanted to in the first place.
How about you, Tara? You deal with thousands of writers.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would say is that to just, when you're putting your books out there, make sure that you want to maintain that they're there for your readers. So sometimes people kind of go to Amazon and choose the exclusivity because it suits them at that time, and that might be perfectly a part of your marketing plan. But if you tend to hop in and out of that and you're restricting yourself from readers, it can make it really hard. It makes it hard to gain an audience in specific retailers. Like Kobo's algorithms take a little while to learn about you, so if you're removing your books and then putting them back, you're sort of like just kind of making it harder on yourself. So that would be the one thing that I see people doing that I'm kind of like, oh, you're hurting yourself a little bit with that.
Yeah, I would say I think going into KU is probably the one thing you can do which will definitely lose you readers, because whichever way you do it, if you're going in and staying in, you're losing a hell of a lot of readers in other vendors. I mean, when you mentioned earlier, sorry, that I sold books in 138 countries, that's stats I've got from my Kobo dashboard. That's the number of countries I sold in Kobo alone. So Amazon only sell in a small handful of countries. It's mainly UK, US, some in Australia. So I would say you're going to be missing out on all of those. If you go in for a bit at the start and then move wider, you're going to leave those readers who only read in KU. And there are, most people do a mix of both. It's not that, as soon as you leave KU, all of your readers there will suddenly dry up, because a lot of people will also buy books as well if they like the authors. So I think if you've done it because you only want to focus on one vendor at first and you want it to be the biggest one, and it's a reasonable step to make at first, I would say by all means start with just Amazon, but you don't have to go exclusive. You can publish the book there and have it just for sale and not for KU for borrows.
I've got a good question from Lindsay here, who asks, would you say self-publishing microfiction or short story collections differs from self-publishing novels or novellas? And I know you've published Amazon singles, Adam, so you might have some experience with this.
Yeah, I think short stories are brilliant from a writer's point of view because they take a lot less time to write, so you get more things out there. I think especially in the early days, you can find more readers more quickly because you can get more work out there. And people are taking far less of a punt, I think, if it's a 99-cent short story rather than a $4 or $5.99 novel. They are a harder sell, I think. Readers, I mean, again, this is where I differ because I prefer to read short stories and shorter things, but that's just my attention span of my brain.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, people like longer or like novels anyway, like sort of 50,000 up, I think. So yeah, there are differences in how you'd market that. Short stories themselves, if they're not in collections, are going to be harder to market because they perhaps have fewer readers, and also if your price point's lower, you've got far less to play with from a business point of view in terms of what you can spend on advertising, because the margins can be razor thin anyway, even with full novels.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add, Tara, from your perspective of sales on the Kobo side?
Yeah, I would just say I know this isn't necessarily like fiction, but just short forms of content. Like we're seeing a real boom with poetry at the moment. So it's, again, everything is sort of nuanced. So there is sort of definitely, like with the rise of like Instagram poets, like, Toronto's very own Rupi Kaur. So seeing that do very well digitally. And that's one of the great things about EPUBs, and especially with short stories too, is that you can do really interesting things with the formatting. And I just like digging into the EPUB files and playing around with stuff like that. So if you are doing a short collection like that's, or just a short book itself, like that's something that you can kind of work with and just, explore and experiment.
I think that's the key, is that there's always a market for everything as well. I mean,
Exactly.
as say, poetry, it doesn't sell anywhere near as well, generally speaking, as say crime or romance. But, there's still a lot of people doing very well at it. And even the smallest ponds in this industry are well worth fishing in, because, they're not small. They may be smaller, but there's, whatever specialist thing you're writing, there will always be an audience, and you can always do pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the best gift the internet has given us, is always finding those other people that like what you're doing and the same things that you like.
Definitely. And there's been a resurgence in poetry as a result, definitely. Erica Anderson asks, what is the best way to come up with a book title that draws interest? And since Adam has built this brand of brevity, I think that probably applies to book titles as well. So how do you come up with your titles?
Well, even 32 books in, I'm still pretty rubbish with titles. And if anything is going to delay the launch of one of my books, it will be coming up with a title for the damn thing.
Oh, really? So you don't have the title when you're starting?
Sometimes I do, or at least have something in mind. There have been times where the book's been done and I just don't know what I'm calling the thing. But I think for my two main series, there are themes that run through, and in my Night and Culver House series and my Rutland books, there are, and probably to an extent the psychological thrillers too, the titles all seem to have double meanings. So if you look at the title before you read the book, it has one meaning, and after you've read it, or if you go back and read it again, there's another layer to it, and they always seem to there's mirroring in the stories there. So I guess the titles are, even though they take a while for me to get, a lot of the time, once I found it, I know that's the title, because it's so evident there in the theme of the book.
I love that. I thought you were just going to say that all titles should be puns, because that's where I would go. Like that's going to be my nano book, just real cheese.
Well, I think that's probably why so many of mine come from idioms and common phrases, because I guess they're there. They're not necessarily making up a title, but using a series of words which is already in common parlance and which has known meaning.
Yeah, I like the secondary meaning idea. It's almost like a little Easter egg for your reader. Makes them feel like they've accomplished something as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say that I had a friend who published a book with Traditionally, and the editor changed the title, and she didn't like the new title, but she had to live with it. And your title is a very precious thing to you, I think. And so that is like another advantage of indie publishing if you go that route. Adam, I was going to say on my end, I've sometimes not come up with a title. I've just named the file. And that naming of the file then sort of becomes the title, but no one really made the decision. This is a hazard of titling later. And somehow I can't get out of that box sometimes to name it something else. Do you ever run your titles by like a little focus group, or by some options by friends or family?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Well, especially if I've not got something strong, and there have been times where I've sort of had a title and I thought, yeah, this is brilliant. And other people have said, not so sure. And I've said, well, I'm doing it anyway. So I don't know why I bothered asking you in the first place. But I would say, well, don't worry too much about titles. Don't get too hung up on them. People don't pay as much attention to them as you think. I think making sure it is at least cohesive with what you're writing and what genre readers or readers of that genre would expect, I think is important. But then again, as I said earlier, stand out. Call your crime slasher novel Mrs. Cutesy's Kitten Factory. It's going to stand out, that's for sure.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I know. That definitely stands out for me. Well, I want to thank all of our attendees for all their wonderful questions. Really great stuff. And I was wondering, Adam and Tara, if each of you could give just one bit of final advice. What's your number one tip to send people off and help them publish successfully?
That I think mine would be just sort of don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to reach the retailers, reach out to the community. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
That's a good one.
I would say the best thing you can always do at any stage to further your career is to write more. So whenever I'm asked to come up with a simple tip for writers, I always summarize it in 6 words: arse on chair, fingers and keyboard.
Again, brevity works for you.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and that's it. That's an endorsement for NaNoWriMo as well. You can always write more with us throughout the year, in fact, not just during our month-long events. So we hope to see everyone who attended this webinar. We hope to see you on the NaNoWriMo website writing. So thank you, Adam and Tara. That was a lot of great wisdom, a lot to think about.
Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely. Bye-bye, everyone. Happy writing.
Bye-bye.